14 years ago, Cornell finance professor Andrew Karolyi was appointed as executive editor at the Review of Financial Studies, which is one of the top 3 finance journals in the world. They're called the Big 3 journals in academic finance. And since then, the Karolyi family name has become synonymous or shorthand with everything that's wrong or rotten or broken in the world of academic finance, including nepotism, backroom deals, and a culture that quietly rehabilitates insiders rather than holding them accountable or even asking them to say sorry. So, this is the subject of an article that I wrote over on my Substack called The Karolyi Dynasty and the Corruption of Academic Finance, which you can find a link to in the description of this video. And before I start, I'd just like to say thank you so much to my first few YouTube subscribers. This is only my 3rd video, and the launch has gone better than I could have possibly dreamed for. So thank you very much. I'm very humble and grateful. And what I'm learning is that people don't really like to read, people like to watch videos. I spent years slaving away on Substack, writing hundreds of articles, and so far here on YouTube, my first 2 videos already have more likes and views and comments than all of my articles put together. So that's what I'm going to be doing more of, is taking my written investigations and turning them into video form. Let's jump into it. This story is actually less about Andrew Karolyi than it is about his son, Stephen Karolyi, who graduated with a PhD in financial economics from Yale in 2014 and then began working as an assistant professor at Carnegie Mellon University, where the first thing he did upon becoming a professor was to flood his dad's journal with his own papers. And the incentive here, obviously, is that if he racks up a bunch of papers in the best journal in the world, he's guaranteed a lifetime of tenure, even if it was his daddy's journal. But publishing in his dad's journal was only the tip of the corruption iceberg, because our saga begins in October 2015 when Stephen Karolyi presented a paper called Governance and Taxes, Evidence from Regression Discontinuity, co-authored with Andrew Bird, another assistant professor at Carnegie Mellon. And in attendance at that conference was the hero of today's story, who's an assistant professor of accounting at North Dakota State University, named Alex Young. And Alex Young spotted a fatal flaw with their methodology in that paper and alerted them at this conference, but the mighty Carnegie Mellon scholars kind of just sneered and brushed off the lowly North Dakota scholar. When that fatally flawed paper was published 2 years later in a journal called The Accounting Review, Alex Young again spotted something that was off about it, which was the methodology section from the 2015 paper was completely different than the methodology section from the 2017 paper. They used different data and different ways to calculate that data. But the results in all 11 tables remained identical down to the 3rd decimal place. So their methodology completely changed, but the results did not change at all in 2 years. And here's a table that shows the different methodologies and data that they used. In the 2015 paper, they used a Russell-provided rankings index, which is a stock index. And in 2017, they used a CRISP calculated index. So 2 different data sources in 2 different years, but the exact same identical results. And so Alex Young wrote a paper. He concluded that this was fraudulent. He wrote, thus, if we compare the tables from the 2 versions, at the very least, we should see slightly different numbers for the estimated coefficients, standard errors, etc. But row for row, column for column, the numbers for the estimated coefficients, standard errors, and R-squareds are all exactly the same between the 2015 and 2017 versions, down to 3 decimal places. Alex Young then launched a campaign to get to the bottom of this issue. So first, he emailed the authors in April 2017 asking for their data and for their code, which were not public, but they would not answer him. So he emailed again asking for their data and code. They did not answer him. So he went right to the journal, which was The Accounting Review, where this work was published, and he explained his concerns to them. But still, for the next 6 months, nothing at all happened until in November 2017, Econ Journal Watch, which is like the watchdog journal in the profession, they intervened to formally request the data and the code. And the authors answered them. Finally, they said, here's our explanation, but they refused to provide the data and the code. And so the journal got back to them and they said, hey, that's a nice explanation, but we'd like to see your data and your code. Again, the answer was no, we're not going to provide that. 1 month later, in December 2017, the Accounting Review then formally opened a misconduct inquiry to determine potential misconduct in this case. And what that did was launch a series of 5 elaborate excuses, which the authors provided to try to explain why their paper was not fraudulent. Excuse number 1, the copy editor did it. Alex Young in 2018 published a devastating takedown of this fraudulent data in Econ Journal Watch in a paper titled, "Will the Real Specification Please Stand Up?" And the Carnegie Mellon team replied with a note blaming the, quote, potentially confusing description of our methodology on a rogue copy editor who made the changes during the final iteration of copy editing without our knowledge. But this claim is absurd, because what copy editors do is deal with things like capitalization and spelling and commas and periods. They would never, under any circumstance, rewrite how you describe your data and methodology. And even if they did, which they didn't, every journal shows you exactly what copy edits were made, giving you the option to accept or reject them. So ultimately, the authors are still responsible for ensuring that the text accurately describes their data and their results. Excuse number 2, stata sort. Nobody bought that the copy editor made a mistake. So a month later, in February 2018, the Carnegie Mellon team uploaded a 4-page note titled "A Note on Our Methodology," where they claimed that Alex Young did not correctly replicate their article. And what they did at this point was not release their own data and their own code. What they did is they took Alex Young's code, which he uploaded himself, open sourced it, and built it from scratch. And they tweaked it with one line of code called sort. And so now they claim that this one line of magic code sorts the data correctly, and that fixes everything. But the problem is they did not read the documentation on how the sort code works. So they actually, with this one line fix, they sorted their data backwards, which breaks everything completely even worse, rather than fixes everything by sorting it correctly. And so that sort command turned out to be a fraudulent excuse as well. And I emailed Alex Young to ask about the sort command tweak, and he uploaded an extensive explanation on how the sorts it backwards on his website. And he told me that if they just uploaded their data and code, I would have been convinced that they committed no data falsification. In addition, I would have apologized to them and contacted the Journal of Econ Journal Watch for my article to be appended with a note clarifying that there was no research misconduct, just an honest mistake. Everybody makes mistakes, and of course, I am no exception to that. So this problem is not a mistake. And within several days of posting their flawed sort command fix, the Carnegie Mellon team deleted the 4-page note on methodology that they uploaded, and they replaced it with a new 1-page note that now contains no mention of stata sort, no mention of any data or code, no tables, and no citations. So they tried to wave their hands and just explain it away and pretend like they never tried to explain it using a sort command, which they did. And that's archived in my Substack article. Excuse number 3, the dog ate my laptop. At this point, the Accounting Review requested that the data and code be handed over for their investigation, but the Carnegie Mellon team and Stephen Karolyi claimed that their laptop had wiped out everything and crashed with no backups and no cloud storage, which was hard to believe given that they were working on over 30 different working papers at that time, making it implausible that all their research code and data would have been stored on a single unprotected laptop. And in 2019, the Accounting Review then concluded their investigation and retracted the article, stating that, quote, the methodology used in the paper does not generate the results reported, and that the authors were unable to provide the original data and code. And rather than own up to what they did at this point, Stephen Karolyi put out a statement admitting no wrongdoing and saying he was, quote, disappointed by the American Accounting Association's decision. So they're maintaining still to this day that they committed no fraud and thus no crime. All that happened simply was that the dog ate their laptop. And now his CV, Stephen Karolyi's CV, rather than having a retracted paper section on it, what it has is a paper it has this paper referred to in a section called permanent working paper, which is like a nice euphemism for saying this paper has been retracted. It's a permanent working paper. Excuse number 4, the replication kit. Following the accounting review's retraction, the Carnegie Mellon Office of Research Integrity and Compliance launched their own investigation at the request of Carnegie Mellon's provost. And this investigation found no evidence of research misconduct, reasoning that although the authors, yes, they lost their data and code, they were able to privately create a replication kit that reproduced the results. But they refused to release the alleged replication kit to anybody else, preventing anyone else from verifying this claim. So when Carnegie Mellon looked into it on their own, they said, yes, you lost your data and code, but you can create some new private data and code that reproduces your results, and we're not going to show anybody. And they looked at this private data and code and concluded that there was no research misconduct. Excuse number 5, Daddy's core agendum. After being caught red-handed fabricating data at the accounting review, the Carnegie Mellon team were exposed a second time when a special committee appointed by the Review of Financial Studies, remember that's that journal managed by Stephen Karolyi's father, Andrew Karolyi, investigated a second paper by the same team after discovering inconsistencies between the published version and the earlier working paper version. This time, Carnegie Mellon team actually handed over their data and code, and using that data and code provided by the authors, the Review of Financial Studies determined that the two versions of the paper used different data and methodologies, yet somehow produced identical results again. So the same exact error happened a second time where the methodologies changed between the working version of the paper and the final version, but the results at the end stay the same. So after the Review of Financial Studies concluded that the same error happened a second time, they did not retract this paper. What they did is they published a statement, a corrigendum, explaining that this only happened because there was one small error in an equation in the paper. And they put this corrigendum behind a paywall so nobody can actually see it, but it should be here on your screen where it says, the authors regret this error where they made one small mistake in an equation. And obviously it's impossible to explain why the same mistake happened twice, because it's not a mistake, it's blatant and rampant fraud. And it's not even creative because they did the same fraud twice. And in any honest system, that would end your career. But in the world of academic finance, it's just another Tuesday. Following this whole scandal, Stephen Karolyi was effectively exiled from academia, and instead he got a job in government as a senior advisor in the Division of Supervision, Risk, and Analysis at the Office of the Comptroller of Currency. In other words, the man who was deemed too corrupt to remain in academia was then put in charge of regulating the banking industry. Which brings me to why I wrote this article today. On one level, this scandal is old news because it happened in 2018 and 2019, but the mainstream media never picked it up, and I wanted to be the first to document it and show how the sausage is made. But the timeline is also what makes it relevant, because as of this year, or the beginning of this school year, Stephen Karolyi has left the government where he's supervising the banking industry and returned to academia, where he was given a second shot with tenure at George Mason University's business school. He now works at the Costello College of Business at George Mason University. And the obvious question is, can someone who committed blatant academic fraud and had his Nepo baby daddy sweep it up for him ever be redeemed? Or is there a line after which a second chance kind of just becomes a joke, especially when every one of your colleagues is aware of this fraud? I mean, like, what message does hiring this fraudster who has never repented or said sorry, what message does that send to students? Is he going to tell them when they ask him about this story that he lost his laptop? Or is he going to go back to blaming it on a copy editor? Or is he going to go back to blaming it on stata sort command? And the simple truth is that Dr. Stephen Karolyi would not be a tenured professor today if his powerful daddy didn't protect him and if his colleagues cared enough about his unrepentant fraud. For students, early career researchers, and anyone who believes in meritocracy and scholarship, that is a better pill to swallow. While unrepentant fraudsters like Stephen Karolyi are given infinite redos, countless honest researchers grind away for years in obscurity, hoping that their honest hard work will be enough to secure a stable academic career. And the lesson here is that the system is corrupt and the profession is corrupt. Thank you. Again, this is my third YouTube video, and I'm still trying to build an audience, so I would really appreciate it if you became one of my first subscribers. Thanks.